Welcome to the AWIP podcast. We're your hosts,
Jacob Lloyd.
and I'm Ray Smith. Here we focus on investigations and all things animal welfare related. We're bringing you in-depth conversations each week with animal welfare professionals around the globe, so be sure to check us out on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. To learn more about AWIP and our mission, check us out at awip.org.uk or awipusa.org. This is going to be a really cool episode because we've got our first prosecutor on for the show. She is a Georgia State prosecutor and a special assistant United States attorney. Became Georgia's first dedicated animal cruelty prosecutor, and she created Georgia's first animal cruelty task force along with law enforcement. So we'd like to welcome on Jessica Rock. Thanks for joining us, Jessica. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you guys for having me. Good to see y'all's faces again.
You partnered with us before with AWIP when we did a dogfighting training a few months ago, and that was kind of our beginning of our relationship with you. I kind of like to think of you as the teeth behind the metaphorical justice of animal welfare, right? Like we can do our investigations, we can write tickets all day long, but you're the one who kicks ass at the end of the day and you get the results. So we appreciate everything that you do, and you're pretty damn good at it. So
thank you.
So Jessica, before we get into it, can you kind of walk us through like the role of the prosecutor and how you came to be where you are today?
Well, let me start with maybe your second question, is how I got to do this amazing job that I do and have for 20 years now. When I very first became a prosecutor, I graduated from law school in 2003. Before that, had worked under the Third Year Practice Act, and just did not realize that I wanted to be a prosecutor. Didn't really go to law school to do that, but I clerked for a judge right after law school, a Superior Court judge in DeKalb County, Georgia, and there was a prosecutor in that judge's courtroom named Sean LaGrua, who's now on the Supreme Court of Georgia. And she actually got appointed to be the head solicitor general by the governor during the time I was working for the judge. And essentially, after my clerkship was over, the judge said, I think you should go be a prosecutor for a little while and learn how to try cases. And she gave me my first job. And so I thought it sounded like a great idea. I wanted to get into the courtroom, learn how to try cases. And I just so happened to get hired by that former ADA, Sean LaGrua, who was in Judge Becker's courtroom. And she very early on wanted to start an animal cruelty unit and wanted to start prosecuting these cases when appropriate, much differently than the traffic kind of court type prosecutions that historically they had been prosecuted in. And fortunately for us at the time, the police department actually assigned 2 post-certified law enforcement officers to work with us on these cases. Now, mind you, this is 20 years ago when this is not being done around the country. So we fumbled our way through a lot of investigations, a lot of prosecutions. We got pushback from a lot of people, including one particular judge who was not too happy I had an aggravated animal cruelty case in his courtroom and kind of called me out in front of a whole courtroom full of people, not understanding why that charge was showing up on his calendar. And so it was a very different world back then. And we just kind of kept pushing ahead, learning from the cases that we worked together. And one of the neat things that I'll say about learning this kind of as society was learning it as well is that, I got to, every single time we had a case, I got to learn from my mistakes, learn what I should have done better, learn what could have been done differently, learn how to make these cases better, learn how to navigate our laws, how our laws need to be written. And fast forward to 2014, we rewrote our animal cruelty statute here in Georgia, and I was actively involved in that rewrite of our statute, and then have been prosecuting state cases under that statute for a number of years. And also just do a lot of training with law enforcement and prosecutors to help them understand, okay, well, this is what the black letter of the law says, but this is how these facts and these certain circumstances fit under that law. In other words, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that something has to be very extreme to fit under a state animal cruelty statute, that it has to be some severe form of torture or mutilation or strangulation or something very drastic, when in fact it doesn't. And so I think a lot of what I do is try to explain to people the law says this, and these are the types of circumstances and facts that will fit under that law to be prosecuted as either a neglect or a cruelty case. And then I was super fortunate, I guess it's been a number of years now, to get sworn in as one of the first specialized federal prosecutors to handle federal prosecutions under the Animal Welfare Act for dog fighting and cockfighting. And so I've been handling cases with the Southern District of Georgia on that end as well. And so that's a lot of how I got to where I am. Your other question was about investigations of these cases. Is that what you asked me?
Like, what is the role of the prosecutor?
The role of prosecutor. Well, yes. So this is one of the things I really like to talk about, because I think it is super important for prosecutors to understand that in the state system, so there's the state system and the federal system, and they work very differently in terms of when a prosecutor is involved for the most part. In the federal system, one of the things that I like so much about it is that federal agents oftentimes are not doing a lot of active investigations or planning or anything without including the USA. So a lot of federal prosecutions are worked in combination with the law enforcement agency and the prosecutors from the very beginning. And that is so helpful in so many ways, because everybody's on the same page. And by the time a case file gets to a prosecutor, they already know everything about it, because they've been working with that law enforcement agency to navigate the search warrants and the decisions that are made throughout the beginning of the process. In the state system, I think a lot of times we could do a much better job of working together, especially when we do have these very specialized cases that are not something that law enforcement and prosecutors deal with on a regular basis. And so a lot of times, yes, we are unfortunately prosecutors are waiting for cases to hit their desk, when in reality, they probably need to be a little bit more engaged with law enforcement from the beginning on these cases. And I think when I do trainings that I do around the state of Georgia and we talk about that, I think those communities do start doing that moving forward, which they end up seeing the benefits of that in their investigations and prosecutions of these cases.
I wonder as well, Jessica, if there's a part to, and this is by no means criticism to law enforcement, because I'm their biggest supporter, but I wonder if there's part of that is the lack of understanding that you exist, even, that these resources are out there. Would you say that's I find generally it's not a lack of willingness, it's a lack of knowing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get tunnel vision within our own county, within our own city, and with our own people, that we forget a lot of times that there is typically a vast majority of resources out there, not just on the local level, but the state level, and even, quite frankly, the federal level, of people that are willing to help with any type of criminal case. But we're specifically talking about animal related crimes. And there's tons of resources available, not just in Georgia, but a lot of other places too. Yeah, I think we always need to try to think outside the box about where else we can be going for help, because typically in the criminal world, and even within the animal criminal world, somebody's probably done it. Somebody's either probably put together the template, somebody's probably argued the motion, somebody's probably drafted, something that you need. It is just a matter of realizing, hey, I should reach out to this group or that group or these people and just see if they've done this before and there's something they can provide me to help me to speed up my time in putting something together. So, and that's part of what my office does at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. We are the resource prosecutors. So what that means is our role here is to be a resource for law enforcement agencies and our prosecutors, and make sure they're equipped specifically with whatever we're the resource prosecutor for, to be able to navigate the investigations and prosecutions of those cases. And sometimes they do forget about us, but we try very hard to be sure that everybody across the state knows that we're available for a resource.
Yeah. Something
it's really interesting to me, like your specific role, and I mean, you have so many different titles, right? But I mean, you touched on this before, is that, decades ago, we didn't have attorneys specialize in like animal law. And now we're starting to see we have, specific law programs designed for that exact same thing. So, can you talk about the evolution and the advancement of animal cruelty law and prosecution?
I think a lot of it has had to do with the people that have been so passionate, like the both of you, and all these other great people that you all are interviewing on your podcast, and just everybody that has come together just on a state level, and not even just on a national level, but even an international level. I mean, I've made friends with people like you, Jacob, and Mark Randall, and people even across the pond and elsewhere that really like get that these are not issues about just animals. Anytime we're dealing with an animal crime, it is about so much more. These are community public safety issues. These are child issues. These are, human concerns and human related issues that encompass so much more than just dealing with animals. And I think that the body of academia that's realized that, in addition to people that are entrenched in the investigations and prosecutions of these cases, and just us doing things like this podcast to get the word out to other people. For one, there is a connection between animal abuse and human forms of violence, so we've got to ask about pets. We've got to pay attention to these things. Two, if in fact we can understand this link and we're asking questions about pets, we're also going to in turn deal with human issues, and even so much to save human lives. I mean, I don't say that lightly. I've actually seen and witnessed the ability to reach human concerns just based on asking questions about pets. And so educating people about those issues, I think, has in turn helped legislators across the country realize, hey, when people come to us with an animal related bill, we can't just shut it down because it has the word animal in it. We need to pay attention to what else this bill can do and pass these laws to equip our investigators and our prosecutors with those types of things. One of the most, I think, telling laws that I've seen passed is the mandatory cross-reporting laws. Georgia is not one of the states where we have those, but there are a number of states that have passed mandatory cross-reporting laws requiring people who are investigating interpersonal violent crimes and animal abuse type crimes to cross-report to each other. And that's very telling of where we've come as a society to say these are important types of cases and crimes and issues that we need to pay attention to.
This is something that's really interesting because in the UK currently, there is no obligation, even on veterinary surgeons, to report animal abuse. Especially not if we're talking about the police, social services, that they would very rarely share, information about children, or, vice versa, share information about animals to them. And I've been talking about this for years, saying, these are linked, and even a vet is not reporting animal cruelty. How can you say you've taken an oath to protect animals? And similarly, if you're a police officer, how can you say you've taken an oath to uphold the law, and protect the public if you're not protecting every member of that public? I think I like that idea, and it's a proven theory that if animals are harmed, humans are harmed, and vice versa. We should investigate across the board.
A lot of it has to do with the power and control mentality of anybody who is, abusing a child, or it's a domestic violence situation, and it becomes this issue about power and control. And so not only do you have these individuals who are perpetrating threats or harm on, children and domestic violence victims, but also in elder abuse victims as well. But they use pets sometimes as a tool to also intimidate their human victims. And so we see that a lot too. And for me, this is something I saw in my own cases years and years before I ever started teaching on it, years before I ever really made the connection that, this is not just something I'm seeing and hearing about in my own cases and hearing about from my human victims. Because for a number of years, I was a special victims prosecutor. So most of the cases that I was dealing with all involved human victims as well. And we asked questions about pets, and I was amazed how often we would find them mention, yes, my pet, they've also threatened to harm my pet or threatened to kill my pet, or yes, I have concern for the safety of my pet. And so it was something that I was well aware of, but not understanding that there was actually studies on this, that there was a lot of statistical data to back up what I was seeing in my own cases. So obviously that's some of what I've learned and now teach other people about so that they can understand that connection as well.
It's come such a long way.
Yes, for sure.
It really comes back to that human animal bond, and that field is growing exponentially in understanding the connection that people have with their animals, and really helping to understand like why people don't leave these situations because they want to take care of their pets, and they're so terrified that something is going to happen to them. And I think that the more that we talk about it, the more that we understand it, and the more that the community understands it, and all the stakeholders who are involved within the link form better connections with each other to help these survivors of domestic violence and interpersonal conflicts, to give them the best resources and help foster that human animal connection. And we see this with shelters, not animal shelters, I mean with shelters for people, that are gradually allowing people to bring their animals along with them. And I've seen it in all of the agencies I work for, is that if they're trying to flee their situation and they end up at the shelter, but they can't keep their animals there, you have to have these conversations with them. It's like, this is the reality. If you go back to where you were before, these are all the different things that can happen. And you don't have to push that much because they really understand, but they have a very hard time of leaving their animals and being separated, having them sheltered at the shelter, the animal shelter. It's very difficult for them. It's difficult for the officers who are involved in that too. I mean, the stories that I've heard and that I've been involved in, I mean, it really takes an impact on a lot of people. And so, Jessica, you recently collaborated with the University of Georgia to educate the community on issues relating to animal abuse. Why is it so important to educate the community on these issues?
Well, there's a lot of confusion and I think maybe misunderstandings about seeing animal cruelty, not knowing who to call is probably one of the things that, is a issue that occurs pretty much in every city and every county across the whole United States and beyond. Is if I see or witness animal cruelty, everybody's looking for a non-emergency phone number or a number to animal control. And a lot of times they're not able to get in touch or report what they're seeing to an actual human, or they want to remain anonymous and they don't know how to go about doing that. And so one of the things that I try to tell people whenever I get the chance is, if you witness, a good faith suspicion of animal abuse, whether you're a veterinarian or you're a member of the community and you're seeing it in your neighborhood, just pick up the phone and call 911. Just call 911. It is a no-brainer. Everybody knows how to pick up the phone and call 911 because what happens is when we are not able or we don't feel like we can report acts of animal cruelty that are in fact crimes to 911, a lot of times time goes by, then people feel like, oh, well, that happened last night, so maybe I shouldn't report it now, or they just kind of like, it just ends up not being reported. So it also just for our community to understand the link as well, and to understand if they have friends or family that are going through, these types of situations within their home, they can just be aware of the connection, ask questions, help provide resources to family and friends. It's not just the professionals. We need to make sure understand the intricacies of these types of crimes, why they happen, how they happen, what to do when they happen, but also just letting the public know as well that yes, it is a crime. Yes, just call 911. You can remain anonymous, and then explaining to them, but if they do decide to remain anonymous, what that means, that it is something, an option that they have, but it depends on what they saw and whether or not an officer can observe it as well. So it's just, I think, helpful for anybody who might be witnessing these types of incidents occur in their neighborhood to feel comfortable about who to call and when to call.
And what type of collateral crimes accompany cases of dogfighting and other forms of animal abuse? And why do you think it's equally as important? It's equally as important to prosecute these animal crimes in conjunction with the other crimes that are committed.
Well, I think probably the statement is probably more, why do I think it's important to prosecute the animal crimes with these other types of crimes? Because the other types of crimes, I think, are really what people understand and pay attention to, right? They understand domestic violence. So on our animal cruelty, animal neglect side of animal crimes, we have a significant connection to domestic violence, some connection to child abuse, to elder abuse. And this goes for not just physical abuse, but neglect and also sexual abuse as well, and then even financial abuse. And so, unfortunately, a lot of households where one of these types of crimes is occurring, we typically, if we ask enough questions, we see another type of crime is occurring. However, one thing about animal crimes that people don't often think about is that when you respond as a law enforcement officer, they're responding to a call of domestic violence, for example, possible child abuse or neglect in the home as well, and they pull the child aside or they pull the adult victim aside and they just start building rapport with that person, asking about pets. Do you have any pets in the home? Are those pets safe? Have you ever felt like your pet was threatened? For one, it builds rapport with that particular person that they're talking to. But two, it may uncover another crime because we tell law enforcement if somebody opens up to you about harm or threat of harm that is occurring with their pets, that should be a huge red flag for you that there's more going on in that home. And a lot of times, especially in domestic violence cases, we don't necessarily have our human victim willing and wanting to testify at a trial 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. But if we also have established a case of animal cruelty, it may be something that we can still go forward on in addition to or in lieu of that domestic violence charge that we may or may not still be able to prosecute. So that's why I think it's super important to pay attention to these animal crimes, ask questions about them, and also charge for them in addition to those other cases that you're already charging for. In terms of the animal fighting side of things, I mean, I would say hands down, every single case I think I've ever had, there has been some drug trafficking, usually drug trafficking connection to that case as well. A lot of times my bigger dogfighting conspiracy cases also were stemmed from a drug trafficking investigation from the very beginning. And we start uncovering the dogfighting side of these types of cases originally having started from a drug trafficking investigation. So I would say gun charges, drug charges. We even see the overlap between criminal street gangs and even some other types of organized crime like cartels and things like that being involved in some of our animal fighting cases.
What do you think would be key elements to a successful prosecution?
Well, like we talked about initially, I think a lot of that is getting involved in your cases early on and working with your law enforcement agencies to be sure they are in fact gathering the evidence that you're going to need as a prosecutor to establish, to get beyond a reasonable doubt in these cases. You can't ever go back and redo a crime scene, and these are just as much crime scenes as any other type of case. And so documenting evidence, and obviously this would be different for each type of case, but I can give you an example. When we have what we call like our large impound cases or our multiple animal cases, and we're not documenting them one by one, in other words, documenting the scene as it is when we find it, when we begin to execute the search warrant, logging in each and every animal with photographs, identifying numbers, what is going on with each and every one of those animals, we will probably lose those cases on the back end if we're not documenting that evidence in a clear and concise fashion, so that by the time it ends up with the prosecutor needs to be able to connect. Where did that animal come from? Who does that animal belong to? In other words, not just maybe by ownership. Our law says custody, control, possession, or ownership. So we need to establish why that person's responsible for the animal, where that animal came from, and then match that up with veterinary reports that identify the harm that was caused to that animal. And that's what's going to form our charges. On the animal fighting side of things, in terms of our possession of dogs for dog fighting cases, which is going to be on our state charge for dog fighting and our the federal Animal Welfare Act for dog fighting, we need to be able to establish possession of dogs for the purpose of dog fighting. Well, how do you do that? Obviously, you need to establish that you can show these dogs are not just house pets, or, you know, that there's more to the story than just the dogs on these heavy logging chains in the woods. And we do that by dumping their phone. We're seizing their phone on a search warrant and dumping their phone and getting conversations off their phone, getting search warrants for their social media, going through their social media. Who are they talking to? Are they associated with known dog fighters? Are they setting up matches, buying and selling dogs, things like that on social media? That's where, you know, the last podcast that we did together, super helpful for. And I would encourage anybody to go back and watch these podcasts and this information on open source intelligence investigations, because I think that is super helpful to know, especially in the animal fighting type cases. But what type of training equipment do they have on scene? How are they housing these dogs? What about the paperwork? Do they have pedigrees on these dogs? What do those pedigrees mean? So if you are investigating a dog fighting case or a cockfighting case, go watch one of these multitude of resources that are already online. I know the Justice Clearinghouse does podcasts. You guys are doing podcasts. There's a number of other people that have had those of us who prosecute these cases onto these podcasts to talk very specifically about each different type of animal crime that we may be considering, what evidence you need to look for, how to document that evidence, and how to present that evidence to prosecutors so they have what they need. And so I guess probably the easiest way to answer that question is it depends on the crime, but there's definitely a lot of resources out there to dive into each one of those crimes to talk about what you need.
I feel like the three of us could make a dream team. So like you have Jacob doing the off scene, you know, investigation, getting their social medias, finding those connections. I'll go in, right? I'll just take everything. I'll just fuck everything up. Take everybody's animals, take all the physical evidence. Here's your warrant, kicking the door down. I'll do that. And then we'll just hand it off to you, Jessica. That's a good deal.
Right. Sounds great. I mean, you know, the funny thing is that what I think the more we advance as a society with technology, obviously we've seen it in our generation, how small our world actually becomes. And with the world of dogfighters, tackling the world of dogfighting is actually, when we understand how closely connected across state lines, and not even just state lines, but country lines, these dogfighters are. And that's why I think it's so great that all of us communicate and collaborate with each other, because when I get a certain dogfighting suspect, I am pinging people, not just nationally, but internationally, about identifying certain suspects and who they might be connected to, because in the grand scheme of things, they're all kind of sort of connected in some sort of way. I mean, at least some of the bigger dog fighters that are definitely known targets of ours, they are connected to somebody, and somebody's probably got some information on them. And so us continuing to collaborate and to communicate and work together, I think, is one of the ways that we are going to continue to combat this prevalent issue that a lot of people don't even realize still exists as much as it does.
Well, we were having a meeting earlier, and we're planning this new strategic plan for the new year. We're doing a 5-year strategic plan. And I was asked by one of my members of staff, what's our vision in the next 5 years for the dogfighting campaign? I was like, we're going to half it. And he looked at me and he was like, that's crazy. Like, you're off your trolley. If you think you're going to half it, it's crazy. And I was like, no, it's possible. You know, with more intelligence gathering, you know, more resources, more hard work, we'll close it. Because the thing is, they're all connected. So once we start taking out a few, and, you know, we get some really good prison sentences and jail time, we'll have a massive impact. And I think what we've started to do is really collect a lot of intelligence, back-end intelligence that unfortunately other organizations haven't been collecting this far. You know, for example, we're downloading TikTok accounts. You'd be amazed how many TikTok accounts have 700-800 followers. Well, we've now got 700-800 potential people on our database. You know,
Right.
You think you only have to do that a couple of times, you've probably got a really good network of people. So yeah, I like when you talk about that connectedness of, especially in organized crime with animals, how connected it all is. It's actually quite a small community in the grand scheme of things.
It really is. And I mean, they're organized and working together. So to combat it, we need to be doing the same thing. And I think a lot of us are doing
Yeah.
doing a really good
No,
job
no.
of that.
Yeah.
We just need more of us.
Yeah.
Because I would say that there's so many amazing people that I work closely with, not just nationally, internationally, in the state. That we all do a really good job of communicating and collaborating on these issues. There just needs to be more of us. I wish there was more of us, and I think the more that we are doing things like these podcasts, and the more that we're talking about these issues, and the more that we're trying to get other people to join our team to combat these issues, I think the better it's going to be. And I have seen a drastic change in 20 years. I mean, 20 years ago when I started doing this, I felt very isolated, very alone, did not have mentors, did not really know who to reach out to, did not really know anybody I could call and say, hey, can you run this potential dog fighter's name? Now I have an entire network of people all across the country, internationally, you guys, and it's been quite amazing to watch the evolution of it, for sure. I'm not saying we still don't have a long way to go. We do. We have a lot of really passionate people bonded together to combat these issues, and it's a pretty neat thing to see.
Yeah.
Do you feel like as like in the last 20 years, as we've used technology more, that has helped you or like made your job easier or brought more solid evidence into these cases? Do you feel like technology has been a factor in the last 20 years?
Oh, 100%. And just technology in terms of what we're able to do, but also technology in terms of what they're able to do. Because when the dog fighters are using easily accessible open source type, places to communicate, we're also able to get that information a lot easier rather than them just working on flip phones. So the more they've expanded their reach to work together, easier we've been able to do that too. So yeah, I mean, and I'll say I learn things about open source investigations more every day. I am not, one of the young ones anymore. And so I'm looking at y'all young ones to teach us old folks, and I even teach some of the older folks, right? About, okay, yes, this is Facebook, this is Instagram, Snapchat, yeah,
more about all of that than I do.
Telegram. I mean, it's amazing. Like, we're going to continue to see dog fighters communicate using these platforms. And so it is important that we have people in our wheelhouse who also understand how to navigate these platforms, because it can get very in the weeds for a lot of prosecutors who do not have the time or energy to really dive into those weeds. So investigators are super crucial to dumbing down that type of information for prosecutors. In other words, you've got to dump the phone or the social media account or whatever, and then you need to sift through it and itemize it and specify it so that we can just take that information and plug it into an indictment and like understand it from a very foundational perspective. And so that is something we rely very heavily on investigators to be able to do.
And like, aside from the actual investigation part, we have to know how to do all that. We have to know how to catalog everything. We have to know how to organize it and take this gigantic mess of information and organize it. Our job after that is to make your job easy. That's what if you're a good investigator, we can like hand something over to you on a silver platter and be like, go, hand off that baton, is your turn. So what are some of the things that you have seen in the past working with investigators and animal control and law enforcement? What are some of the things that we as investigators can do make your life easier and set you up to have a more successful, streamlined, easygoing prosecution?
I mean, I think the best thing that you can do is just be organized in your delivery of the information. I mean, I am so fortunate because I work with some of the very best investigators that I have ever seen in my entire career, especially the one that I work all these dogfighting, cockfighting cases with on the federal level. I mean, he is just absolutely amazing. And when I get my file from him, it had photograph, like a driver's license photograph of each of the named defendants with their identifying information on the front cover. So that's like page 1. Page 2 is a title of contents. Here's what's all in here and what page numbers are associated with that. You know, that right behind that is usually like the summary. So the investigative summary, which takes everything that he's done, puts it all in one place for me. And then, of course, there's the exhibits and things like that, and the photographs and evidence and everything that comes after that. But when I get a case from him, I can sit down one time and read that case file and know everything that I need to know to create that indictment. And it's also helpful that he really understands the law. So he also understands, like, these are what I see as the potential charges for your indictment, whether it's a conspiracy case or it's a possession of dogs for the purpose of dogfighting case or both or what have you. And he kind of walks through what each of the charges are and what evidence corresponds to those potential charges. So when I say that I go to draft a dogfighting conspiracy case, and I literally can almost cut and paste his summary and put it in my indictment. That's how, you know, organized and detailed that he is. And so the more you can just organize something like that, I think pictures of the perpetrators help for the prosecutor to orient themselves to what the person looks like, not just a name. It's put in a name with a face. And then, like I said, outlining what all evidence pertains to those particular defendants. Because a lot of times in these cases, we're dealing with more than one defendant. Maybe not as much on the animal cruelty side of things, but definitely on the dogfighting side of things. When we are usually bringing a federal case, it's typically more than one defendant. So things can get very unorganized or confusing if they're not really spelled out in painstaking detail. So I would just say the more detailed you can be, the more organized you can be, the happier your prosecutor is going to be, because they're going to be like, I get it. I understand everything that happened out there. It's put together in this nice little packet for me. And the other thing is, too, like I said, having them get with you from the beginning so that they don't just get your report and case file at the end, having them plugged in. And sometimes that takes you guys reaching out to the prosecutors. As a matter of fact, most of the time it's going to take you reaching out to the prosecutor. They're not oftentimes, especially on the state level, going to think to do that. Your federal prosecutors, obviously very different story. They will be involved with you from the beginning, but your state prosecutors, you've got to reach out to them and say, hey, here's who I am. Here's what my job is. Here's a case I'm working on. It's eventually going to come your way. Can I talk to you about it? Can I tell you where I'm at with it? Can I see what else you need? And it's amazing what that one phone call or that one email will do for how that entire investigation ends up being completed and how that prosecution ends up, working, because they were plugged in from the very beginning.
Jacob, I think we need to invest in getting a sign for Jessica that says, like, happy prosecutor, happy life. Like
yes. It's so true, though.
Yes. I also, just to add on to what you're saying, Jessica, I found that when communicating with law enforcement, because I'm generally, not law enforcement, so I'm right at the beginning with the intelligence stage. And I guess you could do the same with prosecutors, or law enforcement officers could do the same with prosecutors. But I find that when I sit down with law enforcement, I try and explain, because generally we've done the surveillance ourselves. We've done the open source. We've done everything. Right. We're giving them something ready to go. They just need to go and get the warrant, basically. And when I do that, I find giving them like a network chart, so they can picture everybody as part of this group.
Yes.
They love this. They absolutely love it. They look at this network chart and they're like, oh my God, from this one image, I can see the ringleader. I can see his associates. I can see his vehicles. I can see his homes. I can see his bank accounts. I see his mobiles, and so on and so forth. So I find that really helps. And actually, a prosecutor said to me in the UK, she said to me, when you give me those network charts, I love it. She says, my day is brilliant. She says, I can picture the whole thing. Like, it's much better than reading, 100-page, plus case file, thousands of pages sometimes.
That's a really good point. When when we do jury trials, we teach prosecutors about how to present their case, right? A lot of the things that we talk about is understanding that jurors perceive information differently. So some people are auditory learners, some people are visual learners. I'm very much a visual learner. So for me, it's been one of those blessings to work with somebody who's like, I'm going to paint the picture for you in like pictures. And I would love your networking, structures as well, because when I see something, I remember it. I don't like reading as much. I don't like, hearing is not really how I learn as much as I do visually. So when you're presenting cases to prosecutors, think about that. I mean, the more you can build that visual component to it, that they can actually visualize the case, that's something that's typically missing in just a black and white letter report. So yeah, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's something I found useful.
And for investigators, like whoever is listening to this, I would say like your forensics are incredibly important, and like your forensic photography. And if you know how to do really, really great forensic photography, that is really, really going to help the case. Because like you said, some people are visual learners. And so when you're presenting these photographs from a faraway picture, a mid picture, and then a close up, it really puts into perspective exactly what is going on. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And so it's almost like an art.
I think that I was on a case recently. I was watching a case. It was an RSPCA case actually here in the UK, but I was just observing in the court, and I was watching it, and it was interesting. It was a puppy conspiracy. Basically, this dealer had dealt these puppies, and they died soon after of giardia and parvovirus and things like that. And the jury, when they were reading out the veterinary documentation, which, as you guys know, is so technical, it's often quite hard for the jury to understand it, I find. And do you know, the jury weren't really that moved when it was being read out. However, when the prosecutor showed a video of this puppy struggling to walk, vomiting and all these other things, the jury was so moved and touched by it. And the defense even asked for the jurors to be excused because they were showing emotion. Which was amazing, because the judge turned around and said, you can't expect people not to show emotion to something when they're human. Right. Which was a great response. I love that response. But yeah, it was the video that did it. It was, that did the talking. You can read as many documents all day long, but show somebody a video and it changes, I think.
Yeah, if that's what you meant in terms of what can investigators do in terms of the actual investigation, in 2024, I tell prosecutors and law enforcement this all the time. I don't care what kind of case it is. I do not want to be putting that case in front of a jury without, at minimum, photographs. That should be the bare minimum. We should have videos. In the U.S., and I don't know about the U.K., Jacob, but we have a lot of law enforcement agencies here now who have body cams. And so they are actually able to put this body cam on and walk the crime scene before anything even happens. So the juries are getting a lot better idea about what law enforcement is seeing prior to, even executing a search warrant or completing the search warrant. But it's also important to go back in the weeds of each one of those animals and painstakingly document them with photographs, videos, show the pain and suffering. Because a lot of times that pain and suffering, and the reason why the three of us and many other people get so passionate about these cases, is because we've been on scene. We've seen the pain and suffering that is occurring with these animals. We understand the gravity of it, not just from the human or the animal side of it, but the human component of it as well. These humans that are being affected by the animal suffering, that we have to capture that. We have to capture that and be able to show that to the jury as well. And there's probably, if there's one thing that I think is the most important piece of evidence that you can get, well, two most important pieces of evidence in animal crimes. One is your vet records, right? But that is your black and white. Mm-hmm. That is your black and white, your somewhat, confusing language sometimes. And, that is a matter of just saying things. But that's why the videos and the photos are so important, because the videos and the photos are going to be backed up by that veterinary report, not just showing the jury or letting them hear what was happening with the animal, but also see it at the same time. So I would say those are the two most crucial pieces of evidence that we should never be walking away from any sort of animal crime without.
No, there is, I don't remember what this is called, but you will, Jessica. So like there's something that's called when in court when you're showing photos that are too graphic, like horrifically graphic. And sometimes a judge will say you can't submit, photo A, D, F because it's something that they said would make a jury automatically find them guilty just because of how horrifically graphic that. What is that called? We're
not allowed to like purposely try to inflame the jury in any sort of way. But I mean, I would say the majority of judges are going to let in documentation of whatever it is we need to prove our case. The problem really becomes if you have a photograph, let's say, of like a strangulation case of an animal or something. We don't need to provide 20 photographs of the same strangulation injury. That's when it becomes cumbersome, and we may get objections for it being, like overly gruesome or overly inflammatory for the jury. But typically, if we just have one photograph of identifying each of the different things that we have to prove for our case, it's typically okay. We have to do the same thing with human death cases. When we have murder cases that we have to prove, we are still allowed to show evidence of those injuries, even if it happens to be gruesome in some sort of way. Unfortunately, that's the nature of what we deal with, and there is a lot of case law that does back up us presenting that type of evidence to a jury, because they are allowed to see what we're describing in the indictment, what it is the medical professionals are describing as the injuries. We're just not allowed to overdo it.
I just bring that up because I want to make the point is that if that comes up, as an investigator, like that should not stop you from taking as many photos as you want.
No, because we oftentimes have more photographs in these cases than we actually present to a jury. We do provide all of them to defense attorneys in terms of our discovery process. So the defendant and the defense attorneys will have access to any and every bit of evidence in our case. However, what we choose to use to present those cases to a jury is up to our discretion. And so we are not going to, it's better to have more to start out with and let us whittle down what we need to prove our case than to not have enough of what we need. So that should never curtail any sort of investigation in those types of cases at all. Let the prosecutor make that decision. Don't worry about it while you're investigating the case.
You got too many things on your mind while you're investigating. You don't need to worry about, how many photos. So we can't talk about all this without giving a case. So can you give us a successful example of a cruelty case or a dogfighting case that you've worked on, and can you kind of walk us through that process and how that went?
Gosh,
I know you probably have like a million to.
It's like I can think of something, as hard as they all are to always deal with. I can think of good that's come out of every single one of them. And I think that's what keeps me going with these types of cases, is the lessons that we learn from them, how to do them better, and also just to see the happy stories. I think that's probably what I want to end with, is maybe not a specific case, but what I will talk about is the happy stories, because we do have those, right? We wouldn't do this if it was all doom and gloom and it was all just, we didn't ever see any positive things come out of these cases. But my favorite part of doing this job is a lot of the dog fighting cases that I've handled. I've got to follow those dogs into loving homes, and I have photographs of them. I get to hear how well they're doing. And a lot of people, there's misconceptions that dog fighting dogs can't be rehabilitated and they just, need to be put down because they've been living a life of dog. And it's actually absolutely very far from the truth. I would say way more than the majority of them can actually be rehabilitated. We have specific organizations who spend a lot of time and money rehabbing these dogfighting dogs that we seize in our federal cases. And they go on to not just being able to live in homes with children and live happy, loving lives, but they also can even be around other dogs and be rehabilitated to that point. Now, not all of them. I'm not going to make that type of claim that they all are, because certainly we have our sad stories from that too, and the very unfortunate things that do arise out of some of those cases. But there's enough happy stories that this is worth it for us to do this work, and for us to keep letting people know that it's not the dogs that do this, it's the humans, and the humans are the ones that need to be held accountable. And so I'll just say my favorite part of this is seeing the happy stories of the dogs, mostly dogs. I've had a horse case that impacted me in quite a few ways too, actually two horse cases where we seized a number of horses from somebody who was overbreeding and neglecting them, to going on to like loving environments where they were thriving. And so it's those happy stories that I know probably keep us all going, but I can speak personally to that as well.
I think my last question for you, Jessica, is what kind of advice would you give to animal control officers or law enforcement who are working with their prosecutors, who maybe have historically had a difficult time getting those cases prosecuted? What kind of advice would you give them to be able to work together with their prosecutor to bring about successful prosecutions?
Honestly, call them up and invite them to lunch. Take them to lunch. And
is there kind of food prosecutors like in particular?
No, but that's a good call. Just call them up. You send them an email. Say, hey, my name's so and so. I work the animal crimes in your city or your county, and you're going to be seeing my cases come your way. And may I take you to lunch and just talk to you about what I can do, bring you these cases in a way that they are ready for you to prosecute them. What can I do to help you be prepared to prosecute these cases? Let's go to lunch and talk about it. I find people just don't do lunch enough. Like, let's just do lunch and talk and like get to know each other. Here's my cell phone number. What's your cell phone number? May I call you if I have questions? I mean, again, it's just sometimes we forget about just working together, because prosecutors a lot of times are not raised that way, right? It's not ingrained in us necessarily a lot of times as state prosecutors to be actively working investigations. And not all of us can do that. I will say a lot of our prosecutors, I know I can speak for here in Georgia, as I'm sure it is nationwide, we have way more hours in the day than we have to actually work on our cases. We're just slammed full. There's only so many of us compared to the criminal activity we typically have coming our way. But sometimes we got to take a step back, and taking a step back and making those connections and those human professional contacts ends up pushing us way ahead. And I find that for myself. I tell other prosecutors that. We do a lot of prosecutor training here at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and that's a lot of what we try to impress upon people is when we work together, we see better outcomes.
So where are we all going for lunch?
Right. just pop on across the pond, Jacob. I hope you have a super fast jet, because I'm hungry.
Jessica, thank you so much. Once again, I know we harass you every now and again to come on and chat for our programs. So thank you so much again.
No, you guys are great. Thank you for what you're doing, and thanks to everybody who took the time to watch this. And I'll just say too, if you are watching this and there's something I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know Jacob and Ray feel the same way. Let us help you learn these cases, and let us know what we can do to help y'all.
And Jessica will be one of our speakers for our first annual conference that AWIP is putting on November 4th and November 5th. I think, Jessica, you're speaking on the 5th, right?
I think so, yes.
I think so.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You're gonna want to come to that. Make sure that you check that out. So thank you everybody for tuning into the AWIP podcast. You can watch this on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. As Jessica said, reach out to any of us if you have any questions, you need any kind of help. And thank you, Jessica, for all that you do and for kicking ass every day. We Love you so much.
Thanks. Back at you.